we talked about, business a little bit. We talked about how all that works, but let's talk a little bit about family.
Yes.
Because
that's my favorite topic.
Yeah. That's mine too. That's what drives you, right?
Yeah.
So you have 3 kids.
Plus 2 bonus babies or kids. So we have blended 5.
Okay.
So I would say I have my two bonus ones and my 3 kiddos. Yeah, it's you're right. Like family drives you. Sometimes it'll drive you crazy. No, just kidding. It depends on where we're driving. But no, right. My family's good. Yeah. So my kids, we are empty nesters now. Mm-hmm. I'm actually married to it's interesting. I don't even know how to say, because I asked him the other day, I said, well, did we date? And he's like, no, not really. We didn't really date. Yeah. And we have such a crazy story, but that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah. But I think the fun part is that because we rode the school bus together as kids and just were best friends all of our life. I mean, truly, it's funny. I'm always like, well, maybe I should have started off with him. We always say from the beginning. But at the end of the day, God knew I was going to have to grow a lot. So family's everything. I mean, we have, again, blended family of 5 from the ages of 20 to 29 now. Every one of them are born in December. Yeah. What is wrong with us? And now we have a grandbaby. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And he is 1 year old. Just everything. I mean, he is everything. They change. They say, right? Oh, wait till you have your kids and then wait till you have your grandkids. And I'm always like, oh, wow, that felt so far away. But now it's right here. And man, it's just so awesome. I am in a different, when I was just talking about perspective, it's a whole different perspective when you can enter in this season of life. And I'm just so thankful for it. It's been a lot. But boy, we have gone through it as a family.
Yes.
My kids have definitely been through the fire, and yet I'm grateful today that all of them are doing great. And they have their seasons, of course, but for the most part, they have their they all love the Lord. Mm-hmm. Just this last season, every one of them got married, and so I literally this is the craziest thing. I had my daughter ends up getting married, and then the next month my son wings it up. Mom, I'm getting married. And, and he had just gone off to the military and came home for break and meets his wife. I'm like, comes in the door, tells me, Mom, I've met my wife. I'm like, what? Yeah. And truly they were married just a minute later. And, and here they are. They now live in Kansas, and he's serving their military in the Army, and she's just wonderful. We love sweet Bella. And I can just tell you, Emily, I'm grateful to see the years that I've really put in on prayer for my kids over the seasons, and especially when we were all just hanging on by a thread and different points and parts of life. But I'm glad to see where they are now, and they all have phenomenal spouses, and just a blessing. And now we're venturing off into the season of being grandparents and where this world would take us from here, So, but I love family. It's everything, you know, and I feel like more so today, it's out of balance. I see a lot of things, but also I felt like, so was I felt like at times, I was like, man, I was totally out of it, but the grace of God kept us, thank God, and so it's not been easy. I think the hardest part is being a parent. It's because you have to raise little humans, and you're gonna oh God, how do we do this, and it doesn't actually come with a manual except for the word I say, but outside of that, which is key, but outside of that, it's just like you're just praying that you get it right. You know? And I'm glad to see on this end that I can see the fruit of those prayers. And it's been definitely ups and downs, I'm sure, like everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it's harder though, this day and age, because social media is just attacking our kids, and for Emma, my daughter, she has a phone, and then she had access to, YouTube. And the other day we were talking, and I said, she said something about a furry. I said, what? I said, what do you know about a furry? And she said, well, there's some people that identify as furries.
Oh, gosh.
And there's some people that are fine with their orientation. And I was like, I said, where'd you learn that? Because she goes to Christian school, you know, and I said, she doesn't have access to a bunch of social media, but she did have access to YouTube, and was only, you know, maybe like an hour a day, tops, not even that.
Right.
And she's very honest about, you know, if something comes up and it's not appropriate or whatever. I have all my parental stuff, but stuff gets in there.
Oh, it does.
And she started talking about that, and I said, sister, I said, what is that? And I said, what does God say about that? You know? And I said, people can do whatever they're going to do. I said, but what we allow in to think is normal is not, that's not what God has intended for us. God wants us to be, you know, whole and, you know, what is in alignment with His word. And so it's really interesting. I'm trying to protect her as much as I can, but it still gets in. Yeah, and I told her, I said, oh, I'm sorry, we're going to have to take off YouTube. Yeah. Because I can't trust that my parental controls are going to hold up when I'm not looking, you know. And she said, I understand. You know, that's okay. And I said, okay. But I just
love her.
Yeah.
She's great.
She really
You've
is.
done a great job.
Thank you.
I mean, just thinking back, like how you've been a single mom. And, you know, I always say you've been, you know, I've been married, I've been single, I've been married, I've been single. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, wait, you know. But you've done a great job. I mean, Emma is very solid, and you can see the fruit of your prayers. And I say that all the time because especially what you're talking about, the world and where it's going. And, you know, I'm so grateful to be a part of such amazing people who have a mission for our children. And, you know, I'm tied to Don't Mess With Our Kids. It's a Her Voice movement. I mean, go look it up. You guys like Jenny Donnelly, Callie Ship Gray, you know, they've got just a heart, and God's laid it upon their heart to go after, you know, the enemy. And, you know, because we're fighting the wrong enemy, you know, a lot of times. And so we have to turn our swords towards the right problem. And I think the thing is, like you mentioned, like the enemy's coming after our kids.
Oh, yeah.
After our kids. And that's when we're going to wake up.
Like the gloves are off.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you go messing with our kids, then you better watch out. And I think that's what's happening. And, you know, I have a friend, Erin, in Colorado, and her daughter was absolutely ripped down the line, the conveyor belt of all these issues that are being taught in our school, and they're being indoctrinated into these like you're talking about, these, you know, genders and these things that aren't writing arithmetic and math or whatever. Like they're spinning their wheels, and they're doing it on purpose. And I think what's sad is, like, my friend's, you know, daughter who gets caught up on that trap. I mean, they were even, you know, because she, like you're saying about Emma, she came to, you know, her mom, and the school was saying, don't tell your parents, they trust us that you're here. And so but yet they were backdooring this agenda to get into our kids, to talk about their identity, to talk about who they are, and, you know, and confuse them. And just really, it's sad. And we see it all over right now, you know, with the assignment of the enemy after our kids in their identity. And so I'm really grateful that it's being exposed, and so many people now are catching on, because, you know, like my friend Erin, you know, she was thrown way off guard to know that they were coming after her because she had a voice to stand up and say, hey, that's not what we teach my kid in our home. And it's done in the public school systems. And because she stood up, I mean, they had CPS come after her, threaten to take her kid, because, you know, they're basically taking our voices. And they're
freedom of speech.
And absolutely.
You know me.
Absolutely. Yes, girl.
You know me.
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, there's the Bible that, you know, guides our life, but that there's also the Constitution, and really making sure that our rights stay intact. And I feel like there is a huge attack and a huge agenda against that. But also that you can't even feel comfortable enough to speak up for your own children.
No,
there's
like
so
you don't
much
even have a
fear.
right. They take
Yeah.
your right away
Yeah.
as a parent.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Exactly.
what's so sad is that's what we're seeing happen. And if we don't stand up and if we don't use our voice and we don't get real about this topic,
Yeah.
then we're going to see it really, really continue to go down the direction that we don't want to. We're not going to have freedoms.
Right.
You know, and already we're seeing that. And I think that's very, very key because like you just mentioned, it's gotten so convoluted and brought so much confusion and division.
Yes.
And so as a country and just into our, I always say from our, you know, from the White House to our house, you know, everybody needs to wake up and realize that we need to do some digging. But I see what the enemy's done. He's caused us all to come so busy.
Yes.
We've gotten so busy that we can't pay attention. I remember when my kids would come home with all their homework and I'm like, oh dear God, am I smarter than a fifth grader? But I would go through this thing and I'm like, okay, you know, we got this. Okay. And I was just grateful. You know, God's given us the grace in those seasons that we go through to need what we need at that moment. But at the same time, you know, right now I see that the busyness, you know, we have more division in homes today than ever, divorce and, you know, and just like selfishness. You know, we're so tuned into ourselves. We're letting TV and letting, you know, iPads and social media raise our kids. And we got to get better. We've got to cinch it up. And I think that's so true. And I mean, my kids are adults now, but I'm looking at my grandchild and I'm like, oh my gosh, but even my children who, you know, have encountered God and have relationship with the Lord, it's even myself, like we can get so confused, like what's real, you know, and AI now and all the twisting and turning. It's like, we better know who we are. We better remember to be that, go back to being that beloved, to be loved, to have that confidence and that security in, I say, the one and only, our creator, our God, that's going to teach us and show us and light our path, you know, in the dark days. And I think that that is very key, and especially with our families, we got to link arms, hold close, and realize that if we don't have our children's ear, someone else will. And that's what I grew when I raised my kids. You know, Emily, I always thought of weeds, you know, and how
pulling the weeds.
And I would get them in my closet. I'm like, we're weed pulling today, because every single time they would go out of the door and come back in, there was something already planted and seeded in them that I needed to say, is that good or is that you know, weeds? And I think that's the difference is, you know, is really being aware and being involved and listening and not being so weary and wore out. And that's what the enemy's trying to do.
You can't pay attention. You can't pay your bills, can't pay attention.
No, you can't afford not to pay attention. You know, and I know sometimes we're like, well, I can't even afford to pay my bills, much less attention, you know. So at the same breath,
it spreads you so thin that you can't.
And that's what it's designed to do. And that's where I pull it all back in about reining in that rest, pulling it in, saying, God, okay, this world has gone crazy, but yet, you know, you are still the same. And I think that brings such a peace. And when we can speak to our kids, I mean, I literally, you can ask my kids, and right now I'm on a challenge with my son. You know, he has such a great testimony of how he was absolutely living for the world. And man, this boy was a straight up, I tell us, and this is on a podcast now, so it's out there. But I always tell him, I always say the truth. I'm like, you know what? He had an absolute total transformation. Just in the middle of an oil-filled, him and God, and I'm telling you, he was living his life for the enemy, for the world. I always say, man, he was a straight up hoe. This boy, this poor kid, he was going for it. He was living all out. You know, I mean, he was, and I would tell him to his face, and I would be like, oh God, he didn't want to ever get married. He just saw so much, and I think that it just tainted his view for love and life and what he could have. And it was just, you know, this world today, Emily, is full of counterfeits.
I see that all the time.
And I think he, some way deep down in all my life, one thing I did well as a mom was I spoke over my kids. I spoke life over my kids. I would get words about my kids. I would speak it over them, and that they were going to be nation shakers and fire starters and trailblazers and world changers. And, you know, for me, that was big, because those words in those dark seasons of my life helped me ground to that to that truth. And then over the years, I'd be like, my son who's in the military, Zachary, he's serving our nation.
Yeah.
And he was the one specifically that had the word nation shaker.
Yeah.
Spoke over him that he was going to be rest for weary travelers, that he was going to be literally, the one to carry the weary on his back.
Wow.
And so before he never did I ever think that he would go in the military or serve and be in that position. But when God shifted it all, then it started making so much sense. And I remember he was like playing a video game one day before he was deployed, or not deployed, but whatever it's called. He was going off to serve in boot camp and start his journey there.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to him upstairs playing a video game, and this kid he's a great kid.
Yeah.
I mean, he barely gave me any trouble, and he was always just set apart and different. And when you look at your kids, everybody has a different personality, but he really was he knew what he wanted, and he knew, he didn't get into the things that other kids do, and not that that made him any better, but he just didn't. And it's just a standard you could see. Yeah. And anyway, and so long story short, like I remember him playing this video game, and I was like, dear God, I hear him upstairs like screaming, like like beating the table or something went wrong. I don't know. He wasn't saving cyberspace or something. I'm not sure. But it was just, I was looking, I was like, oh God, are you sure? Lord, this kid, he's going to go into the military. He's breaking down over like a video game. What are we going to do? And I'm crying out to the Lord, and I'm weeping. I'm literally starting to cry. I'm like, God, he can't. No, don't send him onto the battlefield. He can't even handle a video game. What are we going to do? No, just kidding. But no, it was just like I had that moment, and I remember the Lord saying to me, like, Brandy, like, snap it out. Like, I can almost see him, like, snap out of it, Wheezy. Yeah. Like, do you not remember? Do you not remember? I encourage you, go back, remember what I've told you. Yeah. That I've called him. None of this takes me by surprise. And, when we talk about our kids, when we talk about family, and we talk about being rooted and grounded in prayer and truth, it's like, okay, it doesn't always make sense at the moment, but then all of a sudden the picture comes clear, and the puzzle starts putting itself together. And and so in that moment I was like, okay, God, I'm relaxing, and I'm just taking a breath, like, okay, Lord, you do know, And I remember him speaking, and this was so like, man, it just powerful. It just stuck, because he said to me, Brandy, I have called him for such a time as this. I have created him for this path. Don't you remember the word? And so I would go back and I'd remember, again, that word of being the nation shaker and carrying the weary on his back. And the Lord started showing me when he goes into battle. Because Zachary's, he was the least likely to be picked for that, because he has a metal hip, he has a heart murmur. He's got, he as a young boy broke his femur, and they literally has a metal hip. And I was like, God, how did he even get in? Because he wasn't even by the standards supposed to make it through. My older son, he didn't make it through because of psoriasis and to go into the military. And yet at the end of the day, Zach did, and he has psoriasis and a metal hip and a heart murmur. Yeah. Like, how does this happen? The countries, why are they letting him in? And but we can be the most least qualified. Yes. Right? And yet at the same time we're called. Yeah. And I think that's the cool part, was seeing that when God spoke, that I went back and I took a breath, and that's where we have to slow down. That's where we have to go back and remember. Yeah. And that, God has positioned him, and he said, Brandy, I even put it in his name. And I was like, and he said to me, he said, he's my David. You're right. He's the least likely one. He's the one out in the field. Like, nobody picked him. Yeah. He wasn't the one to go out and be part of the crowd at school, or, to go get involved in all these things. He was always set apart, and God did that for a special plan and purpose. And yet at that moment, God reminded me that his name is Zachary David Redden. Yeah. And he basically was, before the foundations of the earth, chosen to do what he is called to do, which is go serve our nation. And and yet I had to, as a mom, relax and rest in knowing that God's word, and all those years pulling those weeds, that it brought me to that place of, okay, this is, I'm secure in God, your word, and what you're doing in his life. And so it was just so awesome, because I was like, oh, it's David. It is. that is exactly David.
Yeah.
Yes, he was David before I even realized it. And
Yeah.
so that's the key, is the realizing that God has a purpose and a plan for us, for our children, for our future, for this nation, and yet we have a part to play. And I think that's key as moms, and is that we pull those weeds and we have those conversations and we stand up and we get in the way, standing against the enemy's plan to steal our kids' identity, to steal their confidence and security. And we are the gatekeepers, I feel, for that. So it's being a parent's a big job.
It is. It is. And that's one thing that for my kids, I always try to take the principles and leave the personalities out of it, as far as if they're having friends, with manipulation, or you can't be my friend if you don't do XYZ or whatever. And I'm like, oh Lord, this is exhausting.
and it's gotten worse.
It's gotten worse.
Yeah.
It's gotten so much worse. But then really refocusing, and both me and my husband, obviously we're praying together about all this stuff in our family. But, when things shift and things look like dire, and you're like, okay, this is just another attack of the enemy trying to keep us so distracted that we can't focus on what's actually happening, or what's going on with our kids, or what they're being inundated with, so, taking homes that have the father out of it, and then stressing out the mothers to where they have to play both roles, that's really rough, because and I always say this, me and my husband talk about it, but their identity comes from the father. Right? Absolutely. Their identity, who they are, comes from the father. Their security comes from the mother. So if you take the father out of it, and how things are, divorces and things happen, their identity is now open for suggestion.
100%.
And then you stress the mothers out so much that they're having to make sure the bills are paid, and they're doing all the things, and they can't even see straight. They're so stressed.
Yeah.
Their security is now wavered.
And it's so interesting, because I just watched or ran across something the other day that caught my attention, because it was talking about how, because Adam and Eve, right, they ate the apple. He's basically said that he never told Eve, he told Adam. And Adam the position for Adam, right, is to cover, to lead, to be the one. And if, and we're not blaming Adam here. I mean, obviously it is what it is, but they blame Eve all the time. But anyway, just saying, but no, it's like, the reason why is because, first of all, I see it today more than ever. Like you're saying, the responsibility is lying on the women, but also I see it also as men too. I'm seeing it even more kick up, where we're seeing it fall on the men. It's kind of like, it's just, it's crazy. But I do see that, when I saw this thing the other day, it said that God intended for the man, right, to be the leader. That was his boundary. That was the standard. He doesn't move. He doesn't come down and change his mind. We change our minds all the time, but he never does. And so his mind was set up that was the father's role, was to lead the family, to protect the family, to guard the family. And that, when guys get upset with us for teaching them, or some guys or men find this irritation because we women force ourselves to get in the word, and that we're reading the word, and that we're filling ourselves up, and then when we go share the word with our husbands, who are busy because busyness takes over, they have all the pressure on the shoulders of themselves to raise a family, to be the one. And I think the thing is that what suffers is the time in the word, like the out of balance, where if we went back and we just started spending time with God first, and the men especially, then it's like that's where everything starts to fall in place. The guys are getting the direction and the download from the word, and it brings peace, and then we're easily following that lead because we're secure in the fact that we know where they're getting their hope from, and they're getting their direction from, which then, so if we just took like I said, with that perspective, being above the situation and saying, okay, how much better is it that when we go as women, I know for myself, when I'm filled up and I'm excited and I'm like, I got a direct vision, then it's like, okay, that's easy to follow. But when we're confused, or man, we start our day and we have the pressures of life, it just starts squeezing us. It starts putting that pressure on us, and we're not fulfilling what we're supposed to be doing in the role that we're supposed to be doing. We're not, like you said, we're not supposed to be doing all the things all on our own.
Right.
And that's where the enemies come in and broken the family.
Right. Exactly.
That's what I really, all I've ever wanted to be was a good mom and a good wife.
Yeah.
And, the enemy knows the desires of our hearts. And then what does he do? He goes on the attack against that. Sure. And so I feel like for so long, I'd always see, like, what's wrong? What was wrong with me? Or how could I be better? Or what did I do wrong? Like, where is this coming, that rejection coming in at over and over? And I just think that the more that I've really understood that, it's because the enemy is after our heart's desire. Our enemy's after us and our faith in life. And, and so for me, it's like, wait a minute, I'm resetting that whole desire in my heart and recognizing that if I just give my peace away, I'm giving my power away. And so many times we just go along and we let these circumstances of life dictate our emotions. And we got to stop that. And we got to say, okay, wait a minute. Obviously, I can only control me. And so when we stop looking at how everybody else can change and we really do an inner look, then we can say, hey, when I'm being squeezed, what's coming out, that's what I want to work on. And that's what I started identifying a long time ago, was like, okay, I can't change my situation or my circumstance, but I can just change me in it.
Right.
And it started to change because my perspective started to change. Yes. My prayers started to change. I started looking more inwardly and saying, God, what do you want to show me in this? How do you want me to be this, show up as a mom right now in this season or today? Like, I'm not even promised tomorrow. Yeah. I don't get yesterday back. And I think back in the Bible where it talks about the manna, and the manna was only good for that day.
Yeah.
And if they went and, they were traveling, and I can't even imagine. God knew I was not meant to be born back then. But at the end of the day, I'm grateful that I got to see where we can take that wisdom and say, today is the only day that we can rely on the manna that we need for today, which is, whatever, everything we need. And tomorrow when I wake up, this manna from today is already spoiled. It's not even going to be, it's rotten, so I have to trust day by day. And I think that's what's happening is we are so focused on tomorrow and all these things, or we're living in the rearview mirror, and we cannot clear and get a clear focus on, okay, let's just scratch all that and, reset ourselves and position ourselves where, man, no, we know, what are we doing today? Live like it's our last day. Would we say what I'm about to say if I knew that I wouldn't be able to get those words back, know, and this world living the way it is, and living on the edge with our kids, or, just being real, just dismissive even with our husbands, or when we walk in the door, how are we showing up? And I think that's what we should be focused on, is how we're showing up and how we're serving well, and how we're, how are people walking away and feeling when we walk away from them, what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just being more adding value and showing love, and with nothing in return. Like, the expectation, I think, can really be the letdown, is when we expect all this stuff, or then we're doing it out of a wrong heart motive.
Right.
If we can't just give to give, or we can't just do to do, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. Yeah. And I think if we can teach our kids that, if we can teach ourselves first and foremost that, it just makes things better when you're just like, you know what, I bless and I loose and I release, even if you're about to offend me, I'm already forgiven you before you're done offending me. Exactly. I've already decided I'm living unoffended. And I think that's where the world's at today as well. It's just so offended. Everywhere we turn, somebody's upset, offended. And you just can't grow in that place. You can't grow.
Yeah, that's one thing for my kids. It's like, okay, we're not operating out of offense. We're not gonna, we're not gonna operate out of fear.
Yep.
We're gonna operate out of faith. Those things can't be in the same room. So you have to decide how your lens on how you're gonna see things.
And I tell my kids all the time, I wish I would have known what I knew. I wish I had somebody at your age, telling me these things, because I didn't. I mean, my mom, she loved the Lord and whatever. And my dad, he he just was there, you know. He didn't really have a voice for much, bless his heart, but because of what he went through. And so what we go through does matter where we end up and how we in between, how we get there. And I want to get there, you know, with joy. I want to get there, you know, in being just aware that, you know what, I want to show up to serve you, Emily. I want to show up to, you know, serve my family and serve my people in my business. And everywhere that I show up, I want light to go before me. And when we've been filled with so much darkness, especially where the world is today, you know, it just feels like the heaviness, it overtakes us. And I love how the word says that, you know, that we can exchange from the spirit of heaviness for just the spirit of praise and thanksgiving. It goes back to that being the bridge. You know, we have to be thankful. And so many times these days I hear more people complaining. And I always tell people, you know, that if you complain, you remain. But if you praise, you be raised. And so we can raise up out of our situation, again, on that higher ground, to see our situation, like you said, the lens. You know, we got to focus that in, and that's where we're going to find the freedom, because we're worried about things that don't even matter, and we're not worried about the right things. We're not spending time, effort, and energy, you know, on